On Thursday, Melissa spoke with media witnesses, Scott McIntosh of the Idaho Statesman and Roland Beres of KIVI Channel 6, about what they saw and what the state might do next.
Thanks so much, both of you, for being here. First of all, why is it so important for media to be part of the pool of witnesses for executions, Scott?
Well, I think it's really important to have an impartial witness to see if there are problems, if there are issues with this is the most important solemn act that a government can take, is taking somebody else's life. And, there have been botched executions in the past, and I think it's important for an objective, impartial third-party witness to see what's happening and make sure that everything is above board and done correctly.
And Roland, I think most people know that the state called off the execution after an hour, but what exactly happened on Wednesday morning?
Well, as we watched, they went through 8 different IV attempts, and each one failed. And I think Creech was calm throughout the entire process. There was no outbursts, really not much from him. And they kept trying, kept explaining to him it didn't work. We're going to try again. They tried one arm, then the other arm, 2 places on each arm, 2 places on each leg. And they couldn't find a vein that was suitable. It doesn't mean necessarily they couldn't get into the vein. I think to put the chemicals in, it has to be a proper, setting. And they may have gotten into a vein. I don't know if they did or not, but they said it wasn't acceptable enough. And so 8 tries, 8 fails, and those are, I think, the common places to try an IV, and they said, well, that's it.
Yeah, 10:58, I think you said they called it.
Close to that, yes.
Scott, from your perspective, how transparent was this process?
I think in general it was transparent. We saw everything that was going on. The head of the medical team inside the execution chamber was announcing every step of the way. We are going to apply an alcohol swab now. We are going to apply a numbing agent. We are now going to see if we can find a vein to establish an IV. The one issue that I have with the transparency is the quote-unquote medical team itself. I don't think there's a lot of information about who they are, their level of training. When you say medical team, I think you think of doctor. Well, apparently these are not doctors. We don't know exactly what qualifications they have. There's very little information about that. So while the process overall was transparent, I think that is the one area. And of course, we've got a situation where you had 8 attempts to find a vein for an IV that were all unsuccessful. And so I think it's fair to question the level of qualifications of those who are performing the IV setting.
And the Department of Correction does have an SOP where they outline who is qualified to be on the medical team. We know that it's not just a random person off the street. They do need to have medical training. But there's also another key part that has been an issue for years in Idaho, and that's been where they get the chemicals in the first place. In 2022, we know that the legislature passed a law to make that information exempt from public records request after losing a lawsuit about where similar execution attempts in the past and similar attempts to get lethal injection chemicals. We don't know, and we won't know, where the state procured these chemicals.
Right, and I think that is a good point. And again, the state had trouble procuring these chemicals until they passed that law that made the identity of the seller of those drugs exempt from public records law, and then miraculously they were able to secure those drugs. And so again, we never got to that point yesterday on Wednesday with Mr. Creech, so we don't know what the outcome would have been. But that is the concern, that if the chemicals, are they expired, or what reaction the Mr. Creech might have to those chemicals, without knowing what those chemicals are, we're just left in the dark on that point.
Executions are kind of this perfect nexus of justice, of public policy, of media and government transparency, and religion and ethics and culture. And you touched a little bit on in the press conference after they called it off, that it was pretty surreal actually seeing this happen in the execution chamber. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to actually witness this attempt?
Well, this is the first time I'd been in the witness chamber. I've covered 3 total executions in my career, but first time in there. And, you know, walking through a prison to begin with is a weird experience. Then going into the death chamber witness room, it's sparse. But once you see the people come in, you see people in masks, fully, you know, obscured. That's a very bizarre thing to see. 3 people working on someone covered basically from head to toe so you can't identify them. And just knowing the gravity of the situation, that someone's going to die. You don't run into that very often. That's certainly the case for most people in the world. So it's very bizarre. They are very precise with what they're doing. The staff that's there, it's almost ceremonial. They, once they brought Creech onto the table, they had, I think, 8 or 9 big officers lift him up off the gurney and then out onto the table. And then they lifted up a big white sheet like they were setting, you know, a bedspread. All of that sort of almost ceremonial. It's just a very surreal experience to know that you're there to witness this person die and to see all the elements that go along with it. It's really strange.
And then for this specific instance, the added layer of it not happening, of them calling it off.
Sure.
I noticed that both in Governor Little's comments after, in his press release after, and Director T. Walt's comments in the press conference, that there was a defense of the medical team, that, you know, they made the right call, that this is an experienced medical team that did what they should have done. That contrasted with Attorney General Raul Labrador's statement. There was a sense of frustration in that statement that justice had been delayed once again. I thought that was notable, Scott.
Yeah, and it was palpable, I think, in the media witness room at least, that, you know, you had the first attempt and it wasn't successful, and then you had another attempt and it wasn't successful. And again, every time they were trying to find a vein and set an IV, you were thinking, okay, this is the one that they're going to do it, and we're finally going to have lethal injection here. But then after the 4th or the 5th try, there's kind of a sense of frustration that, you know, what is happening? Why is this not happening? What is the problem here? And so we are not privy to the other witness room. We were just in the media witness room, but I could imagine that the feelings were the same in the other room. And for Creech and his family and friends, there must have been a tremendous sense of relief each time they said we were unsuccessful.
There were a lot of questions too about what now. We already know that, you know, Thomas Creech's death warrant expired at 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, but he's still on death row. And there are still 7 other people on death row who are watching this play out. Scott, any indication of what might happen next?
No, and in fact, Idaho Department of Correction Director Josh T. Walt was asked that very question at the press conference and said, we really don't know. We're looking at our options. We're trying to figure out what to do next. The only options really are, according to state law, is lethal injection or firing squad. Firing squad is not available to the state right now because they still need to build the facility. And so that just leaves lethal injection. And so the question, I think, is, would they try that again? Knowing that after 8 attempts, they were not able to find a vein, would they go through that all over again in an attempt to do lethal injection again?
There's always the possibility too, Roland, that the legislature that's watching this, that has already made multiple changes to statute to make it easier to carry out executions between the firing squad and the shield law on chemical providers for lethal injections. There's the possibility that they're watching this and might make more statute changes.
I don't know what statute is going to change the fact that you can't find a vein.
But there's also nitrous hypoxia using...
Yeah, I understand that. And when we talk about, you know, firing squad, there's not just building the facility, there's the protocol that goes along with it. There's the possible lawsuits that other sources of execution have gone through and have been tested through, you know, trial by fire. No pun intended. It, you know, to get to that point where we can actually, you know, execute someone by firing squad, to me seems like it would be very extensive no matter what the legislature does. To me, again, what the legislature has done to this point is something that the public should question. When you do any of this in secret, any of it, in secret in the name of the people of Idaho, it raises a lot of questions and concerns. That's why we're there, to keep an eye on the process. But when they say, well, you can't know where this came from, you can't know the procedures, it raises questions in people's minds that maybe things are being hidden, and that's not a good thing.
Roland Beres, Scott McIntosh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.